Devin Lazar in his car. I like that it rhymes. At Gillette Stadium. I love it. This is the age of COVID training camp where you have to do videos from your car. If you want your mask off, you have to be safe. Anyways, you're at Gillette Stadium, day 2 of padded practice. How'd everything go down?
That's exactly how I would describe it, Sierra. It is Pat's training camp in 2020. Is me here sitting in my car doing this live stream. But day 2 of Patriots training camp, I would say, was a lot like day 1 of Pat's camp. A little bit more passing going on here today. Yesterday, was extremely run heavy. A lot of run periods early on. You put on the pads. Belichick wants to run the football, and I think that's what we saw yesterday. Today, we saw a little bit more throwing. The quarterbacks had some ups and downs. Jarrett Stidham came back down to earth a little bit after a really strong practice yesterday. Had 3 picks today. A couple of them were on the receivers, I would say, and was more about receiver error than quarterback error, and we can get into that. But really, I think the thing that stands out to me so far is that 3 guys, along with the Patriots secondary, which continues to just shut every single person down in the entire camp. But the 3 guys that I would say stand out above the rest right now are Kyle Duggar, Devin Asiasi, and Damien Harris. 3 really strong training camps so far for those guys. Duggar in particular is really impressive. I mean, playing all over the defense already. He made an interception from center field today, and he came and had a really great run fit in the box as well, or later in practice. I'm extremely impressed with how much he's been able to do so early on in practice.
Not only is that exciting that Kyle Duggar, Harris, and Asiasi are standing out to you, a little surprising after Belichick, like you said, went on that long rant about how tough it is for the rookies this season and how they're kind of drowning. So good to know that they're catching up quick and clearly standing out in these camps. We have a couple questions coming in here. Over on Twitter, someone asked, most surprising and most disappointing so far in camp?
Well, I don't want to, pile on him too much, but I would say the most disappointing so far is N'Keal Harry, just because he looks good. He looks like he's in better shape. He's slimmed down a little bit. His feet look a little bit faster than they did last year, but it just hasn't translated yet into plays on the field, right? He's not demanding targets. He made a nice catch today on J.C. Jackson, battling through some contact at the top of the route, which is something that he struggled with a little bit at times last year. He did it much better here today, but overall, we haven't really seen him pop, right? We haven't seen that flashy play. We haven't seen that big play through the air yet, that big connection. So it hasn't come together so far for N'Keal, but you can definitely tell that the offseason training has paid some dividends, and he said as much after practice today when he spoke with the media, that his training is definitely carrying over to the practice field. We just need to see it really elevate himself to that next step. In terms of who's the most impressive, I think that was the other question, right? I just went on a long rant and I forgot. All right, most impressive, surprising, Devin Ross has got to be the guy, right? And I don't know if Devin Ross is going to make this team. Early on in camp last year, I learned from my mistakes this year with Mo Harris last year. We all jumped on the bandwagon. He was playing so well early on in camp, and then he really flamed out towards the end. But Devin Ross is definitely running routes crisply. He's got some speed and some burst to him to separate over the top, and he's made some nice contested grabs after getting separation over the top. Once the ball gets there, he's done a nice job of shielding the catch point and making some tough catches down the field. So he's looked very impressive so far. We'll see if it continues, going forward for the rest of the camp or then into the regular season if he does make the roster.
Yeah, it's funny. Devin Ross, of course, someone we literally never mentioned as being in the conversation of wide receivers to make this roster. Now he's the talk of the town in day 2 of padded practice. We got a couple questions here. What is everyone seeing in Devin Ross based on all the reports so far? Obviously, a lot to do with him today in terms of the catches he was able to make.
I think it's the ability to separate over the top and the speed vertically down the field that we know this Patriots offense desperately needs. Some firepower, some speed, some kind of urgency on the outside, I would say, from some of these guys. And Ross so far has been sort of the spark plug. He's been the guy that's made the plays. He had a nice touchdown catch from Cam Newton at the end of practice yesterday, along with a couple bombs from Brian Hoyer over the last couple of days. So he's just making plays, and not a lot of guys right now on the offensive side of the ball, I would say, Lacy era are making a ton of plays out of the skill players. It's really been Asiasi, Harris, and Ross have kind of been the ringleaders. And, there's been a few nice catches for Gunnar Olszewski. I wrote about that today. He ran maybe his best route I've ever seen him run in a Patriots uniform early in practice. It was against UDFA cornerback Miles Bryant, so not exactly Stephon Gilmore, but it was a really nice route that he ran, a little fake to the outside, come back on the post, and Bryant completely lost Bryant, and Hoyer was able to hit him eventually. So I think that there's some good things coming from Gunnar, but overall I keep on coming back to the same thing. And this was kind of my main point in my notebook today, is that if this offense is going to score a lot of points, if they're going to produce at a high level, Stidham is really the most comfortable quarterback in camp so far, I would say, with running the scheme and getting the ball out and throwing the ball accurately and on time. But without that mobile element, I don't know if they have a ton of firepower to really move the football. And I think Cam can bring that sort of extra offensive weapon to the table that might be able to open things up for some of these other guys. Because when Stidham's in there, the defense is they're all over these wide receivers because they know the quarterback's not going anywhere, and they know that he's just going to stand in the pocket and wait for somebody to come open. And unfortunately, the Patriots are where they're at with their weapons right now.
We talked a lot about what you saw out of the quarterbacks yesterday and how you were impressed with Stidham just off first glance. Obviously, came back down to earth a little bit today. We have a question here, though. Is Cam Newton looking like a starter out there?
Well, he's acting like a starter, that's for sure. I think the coolest part for me so far about just witnessing Cam out at practice is that even in a quarterback competition where he knows he's not guaranteed the starting job, he's still bringing the energy from the jump, right? He gets out there at practice, he's hooting, he's hollering, he's dancing to the music during stretching, he's getting everybody kind of energized and in the moment. I think that his teammates in the locker room are really, that's the number one thing that you hear, other than his size, of course, is energy, right? He's really bringing this kind of infectious energy about him. And that's really nice to see from a guy that is a former MVP that's not guaranteed anything and could kind of sulk, quite honestly, with the fact that he's not being given starting reps right away. He is in a competition with Jared Stidham and Brian Hoyer. With his resume, could be a little bit hurtful for some guys. Mm-hmm. But Cam's not taking it that way, so that's cool to see. Look, I think the biggest thing with Cam, he looks fine physically, right? He looks like he can still move around. The ball's coming out with zip. He's got enough kind of arm strength on the ball and all that kind of stuff. But he just looks like a guy that is trying to figure out the offense. And it's a little bit slow right now. It's a little bit kind of, holding the ball, patting the ball in the pocket, waiting for somebody to get open or waiting for him to cycle through his read to get to the right receiver. And it's not happening as quickly as you'd like it to happen right now for him. But you see the flashes, you see the glimpses of what he can do physically.
And on that same note, how is Damari Byrd looking and Cam's chemistry with the wide receivers? I know you were excited about seeing Byrd and his speed that he was able to bring. Has he shown flashes of that in his potential so far in camp?
He has, but he has also shown some growing pains as well. Early on in practice, they were doing first-string offense against backup defense and vice versa on the other practice field. So the starting offense with Stidham and Cam were going through drills against the backup defense. And Damari Byrd kind of rounded off his route a little bit on a deep outcut. And Michael Jackson, the newly acquired cornerback that the Patriots just got from the Lions, jumped the route for the very first interception at training camp for any Patriots defender. And you saw that play and, you were like, okay, well, that's not a great sign. Didn't really fight through the contact, didn't really come downhill and let himself get undercut. Later on in practice, Byrd came back and made basically the identical play against Jason McCourty, and his teammates were really kind of, popping him up and propping him up and applauding him for the fact that he corrected the mistake earlier in practice. He also got over the top of Justin Bethel on a post route, but Cam just threw it a little bit too far for him. The chemistry for Cam with the wide receivers, I think, is a work in progress. He seems to have some sort of a rapport so far with the tight ends and with Mohamed Sanu, but I think it's so early for Cam right now, and his head still seems to be spinning a little bit, that we're not even at the stage yet where he's starting to really develop chemistry with guys. He's still just kind of concerned about the playbook right now.
Right, and we have a question on Twitter about Devin Asiasi. We talked about the rookies yesterday after day one, and you were impressed with their involvement and the amount of snaps they were getting, him and Dalton Keene kind of alternating on almost every play. How was Asiasi during practice today? Because people are excited about him.
You should be excited about him. I mean, I don't want to get too into the training camp tropes and, this guy looks great, that guy looks great, but Asiasi really does look great. And today was the Asiasi show at tight end. He got a lot of run at that position, and he was just, he's just a reliable pass catcher for these guys. He feels a nice feel kind of getting off of coverage and linebackers underneath in the middle of the field between the numbers, just kind of those little option routes or those stick routes that the Patriots run in the middle of the field. He's pretty good at those. He got up the seam on a play early on in practice, and the coaches at Josh McDaniels let out a big scream like, "Yeah, that's what we want to see from Asiasi." And then later on in practice, he actually was pass protecting on a max protect play action play for I think it was Hoyer under center, and he just cleared out Shalik Calhoun in a pass set, and he came off the field, and Nick Caley, the tight end coach, almost jumped on him. He was so happy about, he was like, that's how we bury a guy, that's how it's done, that type of thing. So Devin Asiasi is definitely turning heads down here right now.
We have a question from Ashwin. Is it true Dietrich Wise has been getting better in run stuffing?
Well, he did make a nice play today, and I think the hardest part of camp is a couple of plays always stand out to you, right? And you got to look for it. Is he doing it every single time, not just the one time where it was very flashy? And he did have a very flashy run stop here today. Bill Belichick was very, excited about it as well. He was like, "That's how we set the edge," something like that. I'm not allowed to repeat exactly what was said, so I'm not going to. But
you're paraphrasing.
And it was really, an impressive rep for Wise, and the offensive line had kind of been dominating the defensive line through the first stretch of run periods of practice till they finally got back at the offensive line there. And it looked like Dietrich Wise might have put Isaiah Wynn on the ground, but I couldn't exactly tell. Wynn might have tripped, but either way, Wynn ended up on the ground, and Dietrich Wise ended up with the run stop. So there was some good signs, I would say, from Dietrich Wise for sure.
We have a question here about Damien Harris and Rex Burkhead. I want to focus on Harris first because we also got to hear from him after practice today, and he seemed really excited about the increased opportunity he's getting in practice. A lot of that having to do with Sony Michel being on PUP. But who has the edge right now for early down work between Damien Harris and Rex Burkhead?
Well, I think Rex Burkhead is still ahead of Harris, and you watch Rex Burkhead run, and really, with his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield too, I think he's probably their best back right now in camp. And Burkhead has that burst and that ability to get vertical, to get north and south. He's not a guy that's going to dance a whole lot behind the line of scrimmage. He's not going to run sideline to sideline. And the Patriots just love the fact that he'll get right up the field and really hit the hole hard. Harris has been great, though. I don't want to, make it sound like Harris has been awful. He's been really solid. He made a really nice jump cut in the hole on Josh Uche today early in practice. And a lot of people kind of, it was one of those, type moments at practice today. He had another nice one-handed grab from Cam Newton in goal line work late in practice where he beat the linebacker inside on a little angle route and was able to snag it with one hand. So that was cool. And I think that you see from him just little improvements, right? Every single day you see a little bit more. But the one thing that definitely stands out is his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. He's already doing that a lot more than Sony Michel basically ever has, as the Patriots lead back. And he's just a reliable guy underneath the defense. I don't know if he's going to be a difference maker as a pass catcher, but when he leaks out of the backfield as a check down option, the defense is at least going to have to send somebody out there. So that's good news for the Patriots when Damien Harris is on the field.
Question from Neil. How is N'Keal Harry's footwork and route running after learning from the footwork king this offseason?
Yeah, I talked about that a little bit, and there's definitely improvements there. You can see the kind of the quick twitch muscles at work, right? The quickness, the suddenness is a little bit more explosive. You see some improvements, but unfortunately, so far, we just haven't seen it translate into a play on the field, right? There hasn't been a moment, there hasn't been a highlight, there hasn't been a big catch or an explosive play yet for N'Keal Harry. He hasn't been targeted a ton, so maybe that's a part of it, and hopefully later on in the week, we'll get an opportunity to see them, push the ball down the field to him a little bit more and see what he can do. But I'm still waiting for that eye popper, right? I'm still waiting for that highlight play out of him. And, just sort of the consistency element of it, though, I do see more explosiveness, more suddenness in his movements, but it just hasn't quite translated yet. I don't know how much I want to look into it quite yet. But I'll say this, I don't think he's a changed player, right? I don't think that we're seeing a completely different human being out there at practice. He's still pretty much the same guy that he was last year, just with a little bit added juice because he's a little bit thinner and a little bit leaner and his feet are a little bit quicker now.
And there's usually one every season at least, but do you see any surprise cuts coming so far from your early observations of two padded practices?
Well, I think he's a great kind of locker room guy and a great guy to have around, but I think Terrence Brooks, with the way Kyle Duggar is playing, might be a little bit sweating it out just a little bit. Mm-hmm. They do have Adrian Phillips in the mix as well at that position, and if Duggar is going to play maybe even in a starting role at some point this season with how well he's played so far, then you're going to have a tough time getting all three of those guys, Phillips, Brooks, and Duggar, on the field. So maybe there's a situation where, one of them gets cut. I think it's a possibility. The other possibility I would say is on the offensive line. I don't know if any of them are going to be surprise cuts to people, but guys like Yelda Froholt, guys like Tyler Gauthier certainly have not exactly played very well out here. Froholt's been better, than Gauthier for sure, but both of them are kind of struggling at times in certain drills. So maybe one of those offensive linemen and the backup offensive linemen that they've drafted over the last couple of years, maybe one of those guys doesn't end up making the team. But in terms of super surprises, like a guy like a Mohamed Sanu getting cut, I don't see that so far.
Speaking of Mohamed Sanu, we're transitioning right into that. How has he looked so far? Both of us have had high expectations for him for this season. You talked to people he was training with in his camp and said he's looking really, really strong so far. Has that translated in the first two practices?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the coolest thing about Sanu watching him at practice is watching him even just against air, because he's just such a crisp route runner, and it's just the way his body moves. And the other thing is the coaches will continuously point out, just watch how Mohamed did it, right? And just do it exactly like that, because that's what we're looking for. And he has this great kind of natural feel of his landmarks, So if you're running a route where you want to break it off at 12 yards, he's not breaking it off at 11. He's not breaking it off at 13. He's breaking it off at 12. And that's something that the Patriots receivers have struggled with certainly last year, is getting that attention to detail and those precise little things about landmarks and where you're going to break your route off, and doing those types of things consistently well. And we see Sanu just do them oftenly well here today. He caught a nice touchdown at the end of practice from Stidham. He snuck behind the cover two corner on that half of the field, on the lower side of the field. Didn't really carry him all the way down the field, and then there was a route over the middle that kind of occupied that half field safety, and Sanu just sort of snuck behind the defense and caught the ball up the right sideline for a touchdown. There's a lot of good things I would say from Sanu. I don't know if he's necessarily going to go off for 1,000 yards this year, but he's just a really technically sound player, fundamentally sound receiver.
A lot of questions here about Jeff Thomas, the UDFA wide receiver who was really hyped up leading into this training camp. News about where he's been injury-wise or otherwise.
The mystery down at One Patriots Place right now is where in the world is Jeff Thomas. I had heard from a source that there might be some concern about him being exposed to COVID-19. Not that he has COVID-19, but he might be at high risk of COVID-19 just due to some past health complications in his life. But I don't know exactly what's going on with him, where he's at exactly, but he hasn't been out there the first couple of days. I don't think he's been out there at all. Maybe the first practice we saw him on that live stream, I can't remember exactly, but I know nobody's reported on him being out here, even last week when it was just the team media in the house. So I don't know where he's at. I know that there might be some concern about him being high risk due to COVID, but overall, I don't know exactly, so I don't want to speculate.
Couple questions about a few more rookies here. How are Anthony Jennings and Josh Uche today, and predictions on their roles based on their involvement?
So Jennings still isn't out at practice. My guess is that's an injury related, but again, just a guess. He hasn't been out there the first 2 day of pads, so we haven't been able to see him. Uche's looked good. He actually made a play on the goal line today where he shot the gap and spilled the runner into the pile, and you saw that explosiveness that we saw in his college tape. He's played a mostly off the ball linebacker, inside linebacker. He hasn't played a ton on the line of scrimmage, but they are moving him around. He's wearing number 71 because he's a rookie and why not? And it's really throwing me off. He looks like a defensive lineman in 71. So sometimes it's kind of hard to look past the number, but he looks like he's playing pretty well. He's learning mostly off the ball linebacker right now. And I think the coolest thing about this Patriots team is that it's a great mix between veteran players and young players. So with guys like Uche, you see him talking to, obviously Gerard Mayo, but also talking to Jawan Bentley, just picking their brains, just asking them what they saw, asking him what he can do differently. And then similarly on the back end, you see Duggar with Devin McCourty basically hip to hip the entire practice, them talking about the game, them talking about the situations and all that kind of stuff. So it's such a great mix of these young influx of talent over the last couple of years through the draft with these veteran guys that are trying to show them the ropes. And, guys like Sanu and Edelman teaching guys like Harry and Myers and Gunnar Olszewski, and, go on right down the line with the offensive linemen teaching the young guys. So that's, I think, definitely a cool mix, is that they have basically a bunch of coaches at some of these positions now with guys like McCourty especially out there, and a lot of these young guys are taking advantage.
We'll get to a couple more questions here. We have one on Twitter. Your expectations for the king of pop, Michael Jackson. Does he have a role on this defense?
I don't know if he has a role in this defense. It's such a tough competition, right, at that cornerback spot. It's going to take a lot. But I will say this, he's looked better in the two practices that we've seen than Juwan Williams has so far. And, I think that what you see with Jackson today was really great route anticipation. He kind of was sitting there sort of lurking on that route with Damari Bird, and then he saw him break it off, anticipated it nicely, and jumped it and had a pretty sweet interception. It probably would have gone back for 6 if they were playing it in a live situation and they had played it out. It probably would have been a pick 6. So he made a nice play on that ball. I think that you see the length, you see the route anticipation skills there that we saw in the college game that lead to, really nice ball production, interceptions, pass breakups, that sort of stuff. So you continue to stack those practices together. He's definitely playing better than Juwan Williams so far. He's played better than Miles Bryant so far. He's an undrafted rookie at corner. Just keep stacking them together and, play on special teams, contribute in the kicking game, and maybe Michael Jackson does have a chance.
Couple of rapid fire ones here. Who do you think will replace Jamie Collins in the starting lineup?
Sounds like Uche so far. Looks like Uche so far. He's played a ton. I mean, they're basically just saying to Duggar and Uche, you guys need to learn on the fly. So we're just going to give you every single practice rep imaginable to make sure that can happen.
Julian Edelman, we probably get the least amount of questions about him than any other wide receiver, just because, and he's the top wide receiver, so it's a very interesting situation. But is he dropping balls less? Does he have better hands? How's he looked so far?
Well, he was out of practice today. He was limited. He was there early during stretching, and then he disappeared onto the conditioning field. My guess is it's just a veteran maintenance day. I think he's earned it at this point, especially because they want to give reps to the younger guys anyway. So, whatever. I think the fun thing about Edelman is also his energy, similar to Cam. On Monday, he was, kind of barking at the defense because they couldn't stop the run game for, worth anything for a little while there yesterday. And Edelman was just like, we can do this all day long, baby. He's out there and he's really having a good time with it. He looks like Edelman. He's running routes like Edelman does. He's getting open like Edelman does. He's scrappy like Edelman does. He's creating after the catch like he usually does. But it was just one practice. He wasn't out there today, so we'll have to wait until later in the week to get a clearer picture on whether his hands are better and all that kind of stuff.
And you had Byron Cowart as a potential breakout player for the Patriots this season. Has he shown any inclinations of doing that so far?
Not exactly, actually. It looks like kind of the total opposite. There was a run period where Belichick got on him and Bill Murray and a couple of other defensive linemen pretty badly for just, kind of just washing out, going sideline to sideline and not really imposing their will on the offense, right? And just kind of letting the play flow wherever it wanted to go. And Belichick was not too pleased with the effort. So we saw a lot of that. I think the cool part, I keep on saying what they're saying on the field. There's no fans, so we can hear everything. Like I said, I can't repeat it word for word, but we can hear absolutely everything that the coaches say, everything the players say, because there's nothing to drown out the noise. So, we hear it when the coaches are happy with the play. We hear it when they're unhappy with the play. So it does make the process a little bit easier for us to understand when guys are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. And Byron Cowart, Bill Murray, some of the backup defensive linemen, I think, are having a tough go of it the first couple of days.
I know there's not too much of this happening so far in just 2 padded practices, but have you seen any differences in the offensive play calling from years past?
No, actually, that's one thing I would say we haven't seen any differences at all. There are some moments where you see Cam's mobility become a factor, right? You see some schemes and some plays where they're, kind of trying to get some starting points for Cam to be able to use some of those things. But we haven't seen them reinvent the wheel. We haven't seen them do a bunch of different RPOs or a bunch of different zone read handoffs or anything like that. It's been pretty standard Patriot football, and Cam has taken a decent amount of his snaps from under center, which is a little bit surprising. So we're not yet at the part of camp where scheming comes into play, where game planning comes into play. We're not there yet. So right now we're still working on the basic fundamentals of the Patriots offense.
We'll wrap it up with two last ones. Is J.J. Taylor living up to the hype yet?
He's having a typical rookie camp so far, ups and downs, right? One day he's great, one play he's great, the next play he's fumbling it. Yesterday he put the ball on the ground a couple of times, which obviously led to him running some laps around the field. But definitely the one thing that you do see is that he's so shifty, right? And he's so low to the ground because he's only 5'6" that he's got a great center of gravity about him too. So he can just kind of slither, and he's got great hip fluidity and ability to kind of just slither around defenders, and he can obviously create in space when you give him the ball, whether it's catching the ball out of the backfield or doing it on punt returns and kick returns where he's been featured. He can do all those types of things, and it's been an up and down camp as you would expect from any rookie, especially an undrafted guy, but there are flashes of those moments where he kind of puts that, elusiveness out there.
We hadn't seen David Andrews for over a year. How's he looking? Is he fully back after that scary situation last year?
That unit, the four guys returning are dominating practice at times. Shaq Mason, Andrews, Tooney, and Wynn are having some fun. I mean, they were kind of joking around at the end of practice. Right? They punched it in 2 times in a row with Rex Burkhead on the goal line during some goal line work, and Tooney was just like, "This is too easy." You know what I mean? That was kind of the impression he was giving, at least from afar. They're on the opposite side of the field, but it's you see all these things going on, and you can see that unit, I mean, those 4 starters, they're ready to go. They could play week 1 on Sunday, and I think that they would put up a pretty good game. And I think, Andrews is a big reason why. They're all so excited to have him back. The leadership, obviously, the on-field and off-the-field leadership, the mentorship, the, kind of study of the playbook, how much he knows of the offense. A lot of it is pretty cool, for the players around here. And I think that they're all happy to have him back.
Well, I like it. Quick wrap up. Kyle Duggar, Devin Asiasi, the rookies looking more impressive this early on than you previously thought, more involved than we previously thought. Any other closing thoughts before we sign off for this Q&A?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is what I hinted at with Cam's mobility versus Stidham's kind of pocket style. And I think that's the biggest thing. And the toughest part about evaluating this offense right now is that they're going up against arguably the best secondary in football, probably the best secondary in football. So how much is it that they can't separate, that they can't create big plays? How much is that Stephon Gilmore and Devin McCourty and J.C. Jackson and John Jones? Or is it that's who they are? When eventually last year, we saw early in practice the same thing, not really being able to separate, not really being able to create explosive plays. And that ended up being who they were during the regular season and the playoffs. So to me, I think the biggest question is that Stidham looks the most comfortable. He's throwing the best ball so far. He's running the offense the best so far. But does he have enough playmaking ability to elevate some of these skill players? Whereas with Cam, you can really do a lot of different things schematically with his legs that might open things up a little bit and make it easier for these receivers to create separation and find openings in the defense. So it's kind of they're in an interesting conundrum because Stidham, I think, is definitely running the offense that they want to run better than Cam is, but Cam is definitely the more dynamic and big time playmaker. So which one are you kind of going to go with? I think that's a question that I don't want to answer. I'm glad Bill Belichick is allowed to do it.
Exactly. Well, if we didn't get to your question today, don't worry. We'll be back on Friday for another Patriots Live Q&A. Follow us on Twitter at Patriots CLNS to keep updated on when and where we'll be going live. And we'll have plenty of training camp coverage as well on our website at clnsmedia.com and on our YouTube channel at Patriots Press Pass. Don't forget to subscribe to get all your insights from Evan, who can finally lay his eyes on these Patriots. For Evan Lazar, I'm Sarah Goodwill. We'll see you on Friday.